Lecture 1 is on definitional problems. This lesson relates to definitional problems that can occur in reports of statistical data. After completing this lesson, you will be able to identify the following 4 definitional problems in a statistical report. I'll discuss each of these in turn. Let's start with broad definitions. Before you're even able to measure a variable, you first have to define it. Sometimes this definition can be manipulated to include fewer or more cases in order to make the effect seem smaller or larger than it really is. Of course, in the case of broad definitions, the definition of the variable or variables being measured have been artificially enlarged so that the estimate seems bigger than it is. According to your reading in the Joel Best textbook, you can be a smarter consumer of statistical information by asking yourself, do the definitions of the variables in this statistic include a lot of different or diverse cases? And are the names being used to label the variables more general than what was actually measured? Let's put this in context with some examples. A recent news report from CNN.com claimed that 1 in 5 college students practice self-injury. Before you decide to drop out of college, let's take a closer look at this statistic. At first glance, this seems that we really need to introduce better stress management techniques in our classrooms. However, when we dig deeper into the statistic, we can find that the breadth of this statistic has been manipulated on 2 fronts. First, the original report of the data stated that 17% of college students practice self-injury. 17% is actually closer to 1 in 6 than 1 in 5. Second, and most importantly, self-injury was broadly defined as marks retained on skin. This means that any light scratch was counted as self-injurious behavior. In fact, less than 2% of the injuries reported actually needed medical attention. This is in stark contrast to the 20% presented here. Here's another great statistic that illustrates the use of a broad definition. Gun violence is costing the country over $100 billion a year. This statistical report has been at the forefront of multiple gun debates and has been mentioned by multiple senators. However, little consideration has been given to the definitions of its key variables. By now, you've probably guessed that gun violence has been broadly defined to include a large variety of activities, whether legal or illegal. However, you'd be wrong. When digging deeper into this report, you would find that the problem here isn't with the definition of gun violence. Believe it or not, it's with the definition of cost. This statistic comes from a Duke economist and a Georgetown public policy professor who did a phone survey to collect data. In the survey, they asked people how much they'd pay for a 30% reduction in gun violence. The average response from participants was $24.5 billion. The researchers then extrapolated from a 30% reduction to 100% reduction, and added suicides and accidental injury into the mix, and came up with $100 billion. Here you can see the definition of cost is not actually the true financial value, but has been broadly defined as what an individual would be willing to pay to reduce gun violence. A third example can be found in the following statistic. Americans use guns 2.5 million times yearly in defense against crime. Similar to our previous statistic, this report was based on data collection that took place through the use of a phone survey. During the survey, the researchers asked the participants how many times they had used a gun defensively in the past. Unfortunately, their definition of defensive gun use was defined very broadly to include having possession of a gun when threatened, and included very few incidents in which the gun was actually fired. This example illustrates that even one of the most straightforward statistical reports can be biased by the use of a broad definition. The second type of definitional problem that I'll discuss is referred to by Joel Best as expanding definitions. This refers to situations in which the scope of the definition has been widened due to changes in standards over time. Unlike broad definition, expanding definitions typically occur with the passage of time. Key examples of this can be seen with reports of child abuse. If you look at the rates of child abuse over time, you will see a drastic increase. However, this is not because our society is getting meaner. It's actually because the definition has grown to include sexual and emotional abuse in addition to physical assaults. This means that by nature there will be more cases included when computing these rates. A similar problem can be seen with hate crimes. Hate crimes have increased over the years. Originally, hate crimes only included crimes with racial or religious biases, whereas now they also include crimes based on sexual orientation or disability. Similar to physical abuse, calculating rates related to hate crime would be substantially higher due to the increased breadth of the definition over time. The third type of definitional problem discussed by Joel Best is changing definitions. Unlike an expanding or broad definition, changing definitions increase or decrease in scope across time or across contexts. Take, for example, prison capacity. In 2011, the Supreme Court ruled that California must cut its prison population to 137.5% of capacity. It's hard to comprehend filling a space beyond 100% of that limit. However, in prisons, the definition of capacity is a fairly flexible, dynamic concept. It varies from state to state, and even within states it varies depending on the type of capacity measured. Design capacity is defined as 1 inmate per cell. Rated capacity is often based on the fire marshal's assessments of how many prisoners can be housed safely in a cell, whereas operational capacity varies based on how cells are used. For example, Nevada has 6 different types of operational capacities: maximum custody males, maximum custody females, medium custody males, medium custody females, minimum custody males, and minimum custody females. All of these, from design to rated to operational capacity, produce quite different numbers. The changing definitions in the concept of prison capacity in different states and cities makes the concept of capacity an elusive concept to define and therefore measure. The final definitional problem I'll discuss is that of the uncounted. Joel Best describes the uncounted as statistical estimates based on variables that focus on the worst cases of the problem and overlook the bigger picture. Statistics that suffer from the uncounted definitional problem include cases that are very narrow and not representative of the true nature of the problem. Take, for example, the following statistic: sitting is as dangerous as smoking. This statistic has been discussed in several reputable news sources, including the Daily Mail, Huffington Post, and Mayo Clinic. It highlights the idea that extended periods of sitting can cause a variety of health problems, including heart disease. Whereas sitting and smoking may be comparable when it comes to heart disease, the two are clearly different in regards to other risks associated with smoking, including stroke, aneurysms, chronic bronchitis, emphysema, asthma, and cataracts. In this statistical report, the definition of dangerous has been limited to heart disease. When you look at the net result, smoking causes more than 440,000 deaths each year in the U.S. It's clear that you wouldn't need the same level of warning for a chair. In summary, be wary of these 4 definitional problems the next time you read a statistical report, and you will be a much more avid consumer of statistics.